Hello everyone, and thank you for joining our today's webinar. Today we are going to talk about Benoni setups and how exactly to play against Benoni type of a pawn structure with white. And as usual, I'm going to illustrate it with three different games. Okay, so we are waiting for more people to join us. Okay. Well, yes, guys. By the way, could you please let me know? Well, you see, I've changed my background. Could you please name these guys behind me? So, who are these people? Okay, so I'm waiting for your suggestions. And also, please let me know whether the quality of video and the sound is good, and if you experience any problems with the picture being frozen, maybe some internet problems on my end. If not, then well, let's continue and do the webinar. So Johnny's suggestion is Kasparov and Bobby Fischer. Yeah, actually, there is Kasparov twice. This is a younger Kasparov, this is an older Kasparov, and of course Bobby Fischer. So what do you think? Who should I add here? Any suggestions are welcome, because maybe I need to replace the younger Kasparov with somebody else, because, well, Kasparov twice isn't a good idea, probably. Should it be Magnus Carlsen, Mikhail Tal, or who? What do you think? Yeah, maybe this photo of older Garry Kasparov, which is made with gray color, will correlate or correspond better with the photo of Mikhail Tal. Okay, anyway, so looks like the internet is good. That's why let's do our webinar. Yeah, I'm just checking if all platforms work. Yes, everything works. Let's start. So, recently, actually, one of my students, well, Johnny, I think you are watching it. So you suggested Benoni as a primary opening. Well, or as actually not a primary opening, but a secret weapon. Well, Benoni, in my opinion, is considered to be more favorable for white. However, if your opponent doesn't know how exactly to play against Benoni, then you are likely to obtain some advantage. But let me just explain some simple things, and probably then you will definitely change your mind about Benoni, and you won't consider this to be a strong weapon at all. So, first of all, I'm going to show the game between Garry Kasparov and John Nunn. Let's start d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, c5. So this move is played. Well, and this is Benoni pawn structure. This is Benoni pawn structure. Well, you can also face with a different pawn structure. For example, here, let's say e6, d4, and instead of d5, which leads to natural French defense, it's c5. Then d5, this is not Benoni, and this pawn structure is considered to be more favorable for black than Benoni, but even this is not recommended for black. Well, white, because white gets more space and it's definitely easier for them to play. such a pawn structure may happen with this move order. So this, and in this position, let's say black continues with something else. So you know that if black plays Sicilian, they need to capture this pawn on d4. This is the main idea. Let's say they play another move like this, then d5, and this position also favors white because of extra space. But in Benoni, we have the pawn on e4, not on c2 and not on c4, which provides white with a more centralized play, but at the same time it allows black to get some chances if white doesn't play properly. What chances I'm talking about? So it's about the pressure here and the ideas of a knight sacrifice on d5. Well, not a knight sacrifice, but knight takes d5 based on this activity of the bishop on g7 and based on the pin on the e file if this pin happens. Okay, so the game continued with g6, with the idea of fiancetta, which is quite common because the bishop is not doing anything, the pawns are blocked and are unlikely to move to, so the bishop often, if not always, fiancettas to the king's side. Well, who can suggest a plan in this position for white? Maybe there are people who are already familiar with plans. So Hanif suggests f4. Yeah, well, f4 is a move. Could you please suggest the plan? I'm asking about a series of moves. Okay, so Brian suggests bishop g5, knight c3. Well, the knight is already on c3. Probably you mean knight f3. Well, yeah, developing pieces is a good idea, but are you sure that you should develop pieces like that to, well, I want you to create such a setup which allows you to benefit, to get maximum benefit of it. Okay, so there are a few comments on Twitch. Get pressure on the d6 pawn with a knight on c4 and bishop f4. Quite a clever idea, because this is definitely one of the possible plans, to add pressure on the pawn by adding the knight to c4. However, if you decide to settle your knight on c4, you shouldn't let him do a6, b5. Well, yes, knight f3, knight d2, knight c4 is a common plan. I would start with this, castle, and only then knight d2, knight c4. Yes, this is a possibility. What else? f4, bishop b4, f4, knight f3, bishop e2. So actually, I think that here John Lugran suggests the best option. f4, knight f3, and try to play e5. This is the idea. Okay, f4, bishop g7, bishop b5, check. Yes, that's right, actually. So this is exactly what happened in the game. Well, you see, white didn't anything specific. They just want to play f4 because, well, if you imagine that a few more moves are made on the board, you will definitely realize that f4 is a helpful move. So f, knight f3, and then if white plays e5, d takes f5, f takes e5, these two pawns becomes really strong, and you can either create a passed pawn, you can coordinate your pieces better, you can threaten enemy pieces and not let them obtain any coordination. So if you get the pawn to e5, make sure that your position is already better if you didn't blunder anything. Fine. Well, what else? Bishop g7 was played in the game, and bishop b5. So bishop b5 is a very tricky move. The point of bishop g5 is that it's hard to block this check. So there is one move, which is the best. Other moves loses the game. So let's say knight bd7. What's wrong with this move? Because it seems to be the most logical continuation. The white pawns are located on light squares, which means that this bishop isn't good enough. It's still a good piece because it has this diagonal, but exchanging the bishops doesn't look good. So what about knight d7? Okay, yeah, well, e5 in this position, or e5 one move before. So if e5 here, I don't think it works. e5, then d takes, f takes, and maybe you lose this pawn after knight g4. Then probably e6 to break the connection. Yeah, e6 looks okay. Okay, so e5, what should I play here? Okay, knight g4 was definitely a mistake, but knight fd7 maybe is a better move. The pawn is hanging, and if e6 is played, I think we are fine after this, oops, this and queen e7. Yeah, how to play then? Because if you decide to play queen e2 in order to save, it's knight f8, and the pawn is lost anyway. So e5 is a possibility, but bishop b5 provides white with more advantage. After knight bd7, then e5 can be played. So this is the key idea. Yes, right. So what happens then? The knight has to move, and it's hard to find a good spot. I would better illustrate it with bishop d7 move. e5. Where does the knight go to? The knight goes to, well, let's say the pawn takes first. I want you to understand that if you take there, then it's e takes f6 and the other bishop is hanging too. So black loses a piece. So knight f3, and it's basically the same. This pawn being under attack always. But the d6 is always a weakness. The knight cannot go to g4 because of simply queen g4. The knight cannot go to h5 because at a certain moment of the game we can trap it with g4 move. Right now I think it fails because of queen h4. So we need to play this move first, and then we are threatening with g4, and the knight is out of the game, so it is trapped. Okay, so that's why here neither this nor that move should be played, because both of them provide white with a serious attack after e5. Knight fd7 is the only move, and this is what is the most common move. This is what is the most common move in the games of top, well, I would say in the games of players above 2200. Knight fd7. They stop e5. Now what? What happens if we just continue playing naturally? Okay, so it looks like it's the primary opening of Rory. So Rory, please suggest what black should do in this position after knight f3. Because I think every club, well, maybe every second club player would play knight f3 in this position. Yes, so the idea is to play a6, exactly, guys. So a6 to chase this bishop away, because what else black can do? Their main task is to succeed on the queen side and grab more space, chase the knight away to weaken the pawn on a4, develop their pieces, and expand space on the queen side to obtain any counterplay, because it's really hard to play here. So, for example, bishop d3, b5. And then white is not better. So there is a good question by Peter regarding this pawn structure. So d6 is a backward pawn, which is absolutely true, but it's not a weakness. It's not a weakness that white can exploit right away. So white is trying to attack this weakness with such ideas like knight c4 and bishop f4, which sometimes is not enough to capture it. We are going to analyze such an example when white initiated a similar plan, but it's not a weakness because it's located on the closed file. We cannot attack it directly through the d file. Otherwise, bishop f4, queen d2 would work. So having the backward pawn on d6 blocked by d5 leads to space advantage for white, but not the but it doesn't lead to permanent weakness on d6. Yes, the pawn is potentially weak, but only potentially. The bishop is restricted, which is true, but once the bishop goes there, it seems that this diagonal is really good for the bishop. What black likes about this position is that they can always use the e5 square to maneuver with their knights. So this knight or the other knight goes to e5. So I think I answered this question. By the way, guys, so if you like my webinars, can you please click like if you're watching it on YouTube? Okay, so Johnson, even though our pawns point to the queen side, it looks like an attack in the center is white's the best plan. This is true. So e5 is the key idea. So e5 can be played supported with this pawn, or it can be played directly. This is how the d5 pawn becomes a passed pawn, and this is what white may base their strategy to. So it's about e5. However, in this webinar, we are going to analyze 3 different games where 3 different setups, 3 different plans were initiated against Benoni. Okay. So g6, okay, let's continue. So a4, this is what Gary plays to stop a6. Now if a6, bishop d3 and b5 will be never played. So knight a6 instead. Knight goes to c7 because all other squares are already occupied. Knight f3, knight goes to b4. Well, a4 is played, so b4 becomes weaker. But what does this knight do on b4? Castle, a6, and in this position, I think Gary made a mistake. He could just simply retreat to c4, he could retreat to e2, but he decided to exchange the bishop for the knight. Well, I don't like this move, to be honest. What's wrong with this? Well, it's obvious that black here experiences a lack of space. That's why every time we exchange pieces, we provide our opponent with more room to maneuver with pieces left. So that's why it's better to get the board crowded with pieces, because it will be really tough for black find the best move. So I would either play bishop c4 or bishop e2, and if the knight goes back to f6, e5 will be played. Well, maybe bishop c4 because I need to support this. So I think it makes sense because b5 seems to be almost impossible. I will play a5, and if they play this move, okay, I'm fine. It's just a temporary move. I play this, and then I play a5, forcing the knight to go back. And then I play e5 and dominate because this knight is attacking on d5, but this is not enough. So Gary decided to exchange. Okay, he's fine with it. Well, doing e5 is definitely the best plan, but here he chose something else. So aside from e5 in this position, which is definitely a possible move, what can you suggest? Gary probably didn't choose e5 because he didn't like bishop g4 or bishop f5. After which it's not clear how he takes advantage of these pawns in the center, because if e takes d6, it only ruins the pawn structure of white. So, but he found another move. What do you think white can do? And maybe there is something that you have in mind to get this bishop isolated, get this knight isolated from the place of action. So I'm looking at your comments now. Okay, h3 was a good suggestion. Well, probably h3. h3 is the second possible move, but f5 was played by Garry Kasparov. So I don't think I illustrated this game to you, but this game is also a bit familiar to me. So f5. I mean, even before I prepared this content for the webinar, I think I saw this game earlier. Castle. Well, why didn't they take? Take, bishop f5 and bishop g5. What now? If f6, there is a very nice move knight h4 with the idea of queen h5. So, for example, bishop goes to g6, and you can deliver a check. And then enter the enemy camp with queen e6. Because if they do this move, then this move looks good. So queen e2, rook takes e2, king goes to f7, and after rook e6, it seems to me you're winning. Well, maybe let's do this move, and then let's do rook e6. So white should be winning here. Knight d5. Okay, maybe not rook e6. We can just double. So it's okay to double. This is better. So guys, do you experience any problems with watching this stream? Is 5 minutes ago, so there are some problems still, but how critical they are. So yeah, you can always move to Twitch, where I think the stream works well. I'll give you the link. If something goes wrong with YouTube, move to Twitch. Okay, all is good at Chesslands. Okay. Okay, so fine. Rook take. Okay, so well, if for example here instead of f6 they play this move, then queen e2, and they have to move the king to f8. After which I still think that you can succeed if you play knight h4 move. Four right away. Bishop g6, and then, well, maybe this move, and then you enter his camp, or maybe you play bishop e7. So yeah, that looks really good, even without a pawn. So f5, castle, bishop g5. They block it with f6. Bishop goes back to f4. So the idea of Garry Kasparov was to close the position a bit and initiate the attack. After f6 is played, the bishop becomes obstructed, and the pawn on d6 is under the attack. So g takes f5, and bishop takes d6. If, let's say, in this position, they continued with a natural move queen c7, how would you continue? Okay. In such a case, I think you should play g4 and take with the g pawn in order to attack on the king side, and then maybe continue with queen d2 and just continue the attack on the king side, because it doesn't look that black can do any activity on the queen side. So g takes a5, bishop takes d6. This is what Gary calculated. And this is where John Nunn could continue with just a simple move rook e8. But even after that, white obtains some advantage. For example, e takes f5, or maybe even bishop takes c5 instead, f takes e4, queen b3, and if they take, it's just queen b4. So, and after that, white seems to be better. Well, it's a bit unclear, but it seems that white is better in this position. Or after rook e8, e takes a5, bishop a4 now, queen takes a4, and queen d6. This would look better for black, especially comparing to what they played. They thought that this is a discovered attack and they should use their chance, so they took on a4. Gary attacked with the rook, maybe not the best way to continue, but then queen d6. So what can we say about this position? Let's say e takes f5 is the next move. I think this is what John Nunn had in mind. Then it seems that the black's position is okay. So e takes f5, rook a d8, pressuring d5, and black is completely fine. Yes, their bishop is bad, but the pawn on d5 this time is a weakness. What did John Nunn miss in this position? So I want you to find the best move. e5, f takes e5, and knight g5 is interesting, but what do you get with this? You threaten knight e6, but I doubt it works. Maybe I can even sacrifice the exchange there. No, I don't think works. So e5, take, knight g5. So what can I play in this position? Knight e6 is coming. However, I don't think this is a big issue. So maybe just rook e8. And after knight e6, I can sacrifice. Well, I'm sure black has a compensation. But maybe after knight g5, we have a better move. Like e4, knight e6, b5, the rook goes back, and bishop d4, so the king goes here. Something like that. So if you gain the exchange, black is likely to obtain the material back. Well, yeah, okay, so e5 seems to be not a good idea here. Knight h2 seems good. Okay, so probably you mean knight h4. Yeah, knight h4 is really good. This is what Gary played, and the position becomes completely winning. Knight comes to f5. So what they can do? It seems that the only way to play is to take the pawn on e4. If, let's say, they play king h8, this is the best move according to the computer. It seems like a strategically winning position for white. Why it is so winning? White has a strong pawn center, and white is about to move his pieces to attack the king side. So how to defend all this stuff? This knight is going to a4, then maybe to c5, then to e6, so it's a completely losing position. In the game, John Nunn continued with f takes e4. Knight goes to f5, The queen is hanging, that goes there to defend the g7, and knight takes e4. This is hanging, but this is hanging too. However, if knight d5, it's just simply queen takes d5. Queen takes and knight e7 fork, and we end up with extra knight. So the game continued with king h8 here. Knight takes c5, and this is where black resigned. So why they did resign? Who can tell me? For example, what's wrong with queen d5? Of course, they are, well, the material is equal here, but white dominates with these pieces, and knight e6 is coming. Knight e6, which is a fork, and they face with material losses. This knight is hanging too, but cannot they take on d5, for example, with the queen? If they take on d5 with the knight, then definitely not, because we do this fork, and after, well, wait, the queen is hanging, what I'm talking about. So queen d5 is the only logical move, attacking this knight. So how would we continue in this position? Who can tell me? I want you to obtain decisive advantage. Yeah, the knight on e5 is a killer, right? Queen g4 seems to be promising. Well, I don't think you can play queen g4 right away, because if you play this move, you blunder your knight with a check. It's a double attack, and you're likely to gain a piece back, but let's say king here. And I can play rook g8, so you take on b4. Well, you're a pawn down, but with a strong attack. Well, no, it's definitely not the best way to play. Yeah, so the simplest thing here is just to exchange the queens and play knight e6 to gain the material. That's it. So look at this position. Way to play. However, instead he changed his mind, and based on extra space and pawns in the center, he played f5 in order to weaken the king. So think about this idea once you play against Benoni. So it's not always a5. You can play f5, for example, to close the position and initiate a kingside attack. So the black players should be quite familiar with it. Let's continue with our next example. This time, this is the game between Gennady Kuzmin and Ruben Rodriguez. Okay, so here white decided to choose a completely different plan. Okay, let's start. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, g3. Well, g3 is also a very common way to play against any opening, even without, even I saw g3 many times combined with e4 against French defense and Sicilian. So here g3 Catalan against any opening. So d5, c5, b6, g6. Well, in the game it was c5, and it transposed to Benoni, which is probably a better way to play against such a strategy like g6. So if I were black, I would play this move and get my pawn to c6. This is my plan to neutralize the bishop on g2. Here, black had a choice, and maybe they wanted to play Benoni because they thought that the bishop isn't so good on g2. And well, in my opinion, it's still good, even if this plan is initiated. Bishop g7, knight f3, castle, castle, rook goes to e8. The only problem is that we cannot play this move, e4, right away. What do you think we should continue in this position? Okay, so waiting for your suggestions. Why displaying the English? No, it's not English. I would say it's more Catalan. Catalan opening. Okay. So looking for your suggestions. So you guys suggest rook a1. Okay, interesting. Rook a1, bishop g5, maybe knight d2 by Rory and Paul. Anything else? Rook e1, bishop g5. Okay. So why do people play bishop g5? Mainly because they want to get all pieces involved into the place of action. What can I say about such moves? Well, if you think that g5 is not a good spot for the bishop, keep it on c1 for a while. You can develop this bishop later in the game. What I don't like about bishop g5 is that they can play h6 and then what? Do I move back or I have to take because I cannot go to h4? For example, bishop g5, knight d7, and on the next move h6. And if I take, then they take with the knight. However, they can also take with the bishop and get the second knight to e5, which is another possible strategy here. That's why bishop g5 definitely no. Maybe this move, but then knight h5 and what this bishop is doing on e4. So let's keep the bishop where it is for a while. Well, rook e1, maybe. What if bishop f5 is played here? Would you play knight h4? Okay, what if they play bishop here? So h3, bishop f3, bishop f3, and then they can get the knight to from d7 to e5, and well, it's still playable. You can play e4, then retreat with the bishop and try to play f4, but without a light squared bishop, it seems that black has more space. So that's why, in order to prevent all this stuff, white played h3, which in my opinion is the best option from a strategic point of view. So we restrict black and they can hardly come up with a good plan. For example, bishop f5, right? g4, simply. They played a6, and white immediately reacted with a4 to stop it. Knight bd7. This time, bishop f4 seems like a better idea because it eliminates bishop h5, because the pawn is hanging. And here black decided to protect with queen c7. So queen c2. Knight h5 is a possibility, but then the bishop goes back. In the game instead, black decided to play this move, rook b8. Well, Rory, is it what you would play if you were black in this position? Or would you choose another plan? So it's the question for Rory, and I think also Hanif all plays this opening, so that's why, guys, please tell me what you would play here. I mean, would you still do the same, knight bd7 and queen c7 in order to get your knight to e5 maybe? What about your queen side? Would you play rook b8 to play b5 on the next move, or would you suggest something else? Okay. So, king b knight b6 probably. Yeah, knight b6 I don't think makes any sense. I can continue with e4 and then a5 to chase your knight away. So I don't think this is a good idea. So actually, I think black played well. But even with this perfect play, after a5, they still struggle with the plan. Because now b5, in order to chase this knight away, doesn't make much sense. I mean, because of en passant move. This is actually what exactly happened in the game. And by playing this move, they got the pawn on a6 isolated. Maybe they can pressure b2, but is it really helpful? Instead, what can we suggest instead? Well, knight a5 directly? Maybe. How the game would continue in this case? So at least with bishop e5, this move, and then e4, the pawn is a weakness, the bishop is restricted, and this pawn becomes a passed pawn. So knight goes here and knight goes there, then d6, and trying to enter his camp. Well, if you want, you can take with the knight, but then you have to find a good spot for this bishop, which is not a simple task. Queen a4, what's the point of queen a4? Just to attack the rook? Then bishop d7? So b5 was played because it wasn't because black just doesn't know what exactly to play in this position. So if white plays properly, black always stuck with the plan that they need to initiate in Benoni. So that's why, in my opinion, this is not a good choice against those who know who know typical ideas of how to fight against Benoni. So a takes b6, rook takes b6. Now knight d2. Let's make this rook the object of the attack. So, well, our main plan is to do e4, e5, but it doesn't work in this position. We don't know how to play. Let's just improve our pieces. And we know that c4 is a really good spot, which also protects the pawn on b2. Knight b4, now knight a2 to chase the rook away. Rook goes back. Maybe not the best move. The engine, for example, thinks that we should sacrifice, black should sacrifice the exchange. But if you sacrifice the exchange in this position, do you obtain enough compensation? I doubt. So guys, are you ready to take on f4? I don't think this bishop is so important. And the pawn structure exchange isn't... I mean, black cannot exploit the pawn structure exchange. Okay, so rook b8. Knight c4, bishop f8, defending on d6. Let's get pieces back. Knight goes there. Knight h5, chasing our bishop away, but the bishop goes to d2. Knight e5. What would you suggest to play? If we exchange, this time they take with the rook, which eliminates our attacking piece and also provides them an open diagonal for the bishop. So they, after this exchange, no longer need to defend d6 with the bishop. They may activate it to g7 back. And, well, I would definitely say that this exchange is unfavorable. But what can we do instead? If our knight is hanging at the moment. Well, pawn to b3 seems like a logical solution, but b3 may become a weakness. Or maybe they just take and then they get their knight back and then do the other knight plan. So I'm sure you can find a better plan. Okay, there was a good question by Peter about rook a4, but how can you play rook a4 if there is a queen here? Instead of knight a2, rook a4, in order to exchange the rook. There is the point. Okay. Well, seems to be quite natural, but if, let's say, they continue with knight b6, how do you play? If you take, it seems to me you lose the material. So that's why knight a2 seems to be more logical. You threaten to take, they have to move the rook. Yes, I agree that the knight is not actually doing much on a2, so it has to go back to c3. Now knight e5 is played, and knight a5, right. Knight a5, and then knight c6, exactly. This is what we are trying to do. Knight a5, so we're gonna get it to c6. And then the pawn on c6 will restrict his pieces. So bishop g7, for example, f4. Then knight has to go back. Then we can play e4 when we want. Rook e8, still f4. This time it's even worse. Knight goes to c6. And they can play f5 to stop it. But still e4 is a good idea. And even if we play d6, there will be rook hanging on a8. So that's why knight a5, f5 to stop e4. So because if only we do this, we definitely dominate. White continues with knight c6. The rook is hanging, so taking on c6 is a possibility, but if you analyze this position, you will definitely realize that white is better. So this is the next move, and then they are in the trouble. So this move happens, then it's bishop a5 and the pawn to c7, and they have to tie their pieces to this pawn. So if they play knight f6 to stop it, it's bishop g5, and then the knight comes to d5 anyway. For example, this, and if they take, this is a check, after which we capture the queen. And if the queen goes to a7, then what? Should we play c7 in this position? Or actually, maybe we can play g4 or queen c4. Maybe this is a good move. They move there, then we play b4 and try to exploit our passed pawn. So knight c6, taking on c6 is not a good idea. They played rook e8. Now, your choice. Do you think b5 is a good idea? Knight b5, I mean. Then the queen probably retreats to f7. d6 is still protected. Or would you suggest anything else for white in this position? By the way, what do you think? Who is better in this position, white or black? If white, then how much better white is? Plus 1, plus 2. Okay, so we have new people joining us. We are talking about how to play against Benoni setups. Such setups when black has pawns on c5 and d6, and we have a pawn on d5, usually supported with the pawn on e4. Not obligatory, but usually. Okay, guys, white is better. White has initiative and more space, and I would add better pieces coordination here. And it's +1. Yes, so John is definitely correct. It's about +1, maybe a little more than +1. Oh, thank you. Okay, there are fans of my calculation courses. Okay, perfect. Well, which exact courses? The one on my Chessable courses. I have two courses on Chessable, which is called Evaluate Before You Calculate. Then there is a course about visualization, which also covers calculation. It's called Power Up Visualization. And there is a workshop on the Chess World as well as on my own website. It's called the Calculation Workshop. Okay. Chess World 1. Okay. I also have two courses on Chessable related to this topic. Okay, so what should we do? White is definitely better, but how to get this, how to increase this advantage? Okay, so if we understand that our pieces are better located, they are likely to obtain more coordination once the position becomes open. That's why we should be looking for how to open it. Well, f4 looks a bit suspicious. It weakens e4, and g3 also becomes under the attack after that. e4, probably yes. But how exactly to benefit of this? That's why white starts with b4. This is a very nice move. The idea is to open the c file and enter the enemy territory through it. So c takes b4, and this is where it looks like Kuzmin made a serious mistake. He played knight a2, which was not required. He just wanted to take with this knight and pressure e6, which finally he was able to do. But instead, he'd better just take with this knight and play this move, then go back, then maybe play knight b5 and try to relocate his pieces and enter the enemy camp. If, let's say, this, and queen here, which seems to be a pawn gaining combination, king h2, queen b4, white is completely fine in this position because of very nice move knight e4, which creates a double attack. So queen c4, knight f6, he goes there, and if we take here, then our bishop is hanging on d2. That's why here we should play bishop c3, another clever move. If king takes, it's bishop e5 and the discovered attack. If they try to save the rook, we just take on h7, go to g5, and the king is in trouble. If they play a random bishop here, we can just gain the exchange. So that was the best way. I think Kuzmin didn't calculate it properly and play knight a2. Well, so what they should do in this position? Well, maybe you tell me. I think this is what also white missed. Well, instead, knight b5, queen b6, how to play. So I don't think this is the best choice. Yes, I understand, but how to play then? Okay, so Johnny here suggests knight g3, which is absolutely correct. The idea is to fork with b3. By the first glance, this move doesn't work because the queen goes to b1 or b2 and creates a pin. But then it's this, and then this, and maybe knight d2 and then this. So you may say, okay, what's the problem? What if I move my queen here? If you move your queen here, it's even worse. It's b2, and then they take on a1, so they can sacrifice one queen because they get an extra one by taking your rook. So this is what black could play, and this would equalize the position. For example, here the queen goes there, b takes a2, then rook a2, or maybe queen c2 first. I don't know, but it seems to be equal. White pieces are better, but black has extra pawn. So in the game, instead, it was a5, and white could successfully take on b4 with the a knight, like exactly what they wanted. Bishop g7, now rook a2 to avoid complications. Bishop b7, now this knight is hanging, so knight goes to d3. They take on d3 with the knight. Well, taking on d3 with the queen was a possibility, but then bishop a6 and e2 is hanging. So that's why white has no other choice but to take with the pawn. However, the pawn on a5 is lost, and after a4, rook takes a4, the pawn was lost, and white finally obtained extra pawn. Okay, so let's go back to our previous example with knight g3 sacrifice. So queen h2 b3. What if rook b1 is played? How I think with this rook? The idea is that once the queen is taken, this queen is lost, and then it seems to be okay. No, it's not okay. So take, then knight c4. and two pieces are hanging simultaneously, so it's even worse for white. Let's go back. So this is the position that we have. White has extra pawn, but how to convert it, having in mind that these pawns are isolated and there is no way to convert this pawn advantage into a passed pawn. Well, yeah, having an extra pawn very often prevents enemy pieces from maneuvering, and with this pawn we control e4, which may be decisive in this position. So bishop a6, queen a2, pin. Bishop goes back, rook b1. They take, we take, and rook a8 back. Queen goes to b3 to pressure the bishop. Bishop goes to a6. And how to play in this position? So white definitely needs to activate their pieces. And it seems that these two bishops are not really doing much. This is what white should focus on. They understand that the main weakness of the black's position is the pawn on d6. So bishop f3, knight f6, bishop f4. If we exchange the queens with queen b6, then the pawn becomes hanging. Well, we may lose even the pawn on d3 in order to obtain the one on d6, because this is how our d pawn becomes a passed pawn. So that's why here black plays a defensive strategy with bishop e8. h4 to stop g5. This is a very clever move, actually. And bishop f6. Now, what would you do? So what was the point of h4? g4. Well, then we lose here, and what's the point? Well, maybe actually, but looks a bit suspicious. So g4, they take on h4, then what? Then g5, trapping the bishop. Okay, g4, let's say they take, you take, they do this, you can play bishop e6, king goes to g7, and if you do this, they block with the bishop. Well, doesn't seem to be a good idea. So white plays here bishop g5. If bishop takes bishop, then rook e1, and they enter the enemy camp through this. So look at how powerful this knight is, and there is no chance to play bishop b7 and take it first because of two pieces being doubled here. So they played queen g7, rook e1 anyway. So the idea is to exchange and enter this camp. So this move was required in order to support the position of the bishop on g5. Knight goes to c7. So you may already take and go with your rook to e7. But then there is a queen e1 check. So let's do some prophylaxis first and then enter the enemy camp. The game could continue here with h6, then bishop here, queen takes, and rook enters the enemy camp, which provides white with a completely winning position. Extra pawn, how to defend, queen b6 is the next move. The game could also continue with bishop g5, h takes g5, and rook e8 in this position. Well, that would probably be the best option for black, then maybe rook d1 and still queen b6 on the next move. Or actually maybe queen a3 to add some pressure here. That would be a possible scenario, but black plays rook e8, and they think that with this move they exchange pieces, and with fewer pieces on the board it's easier to avoid complications and draw the game. Because if we, for example, remove all pieces and leave the pawns only, it is a draw, despite that the white is a pawn up. There is just no way to convert this extra pawn. This reserve tempo may be helpful in case of Zugzwang, but I don't think that it is possible, because if only black king occupies c7 or b7, it is a draw. So rook a8, knight a8, and they simply missed this move. what does this move do? It creates a pin, and the idea is to take on f6. So if let's say what, queen f7, it's bishop f6. They played queen f8, which seems to be a better move. And after knight b4, black realized that their bishop is trapped and they'll be a piece down. So this is where they resigned. So what this game illustrates us? It illustrates us that we can play almost any strategy. Well, yeah, we can even play a fiancetta strategy. The black position, the main problem of the black's position is a lack of space, definitely, and a permanent weakness on d6 that we're trying to exploit later in the game. So the only counterplay seems to be the b5 move and some queenside activity, but that won't happen if white doesn't make any serious mistake. For example, here b5 was finally played, but the pawn is on the a6, not on b5. And later in the game, the a5 pawn was lost. Also, white used their main idea and settled their knight on c4 to either attack or replace it to c6 and attack several squares into the enemy territory, which also prevents enemy pieces maneuvering. This bishop on g2 was supporting it. So how black could play for a win in this position? This is a big question for me. They could play for a win, but their strategy should be based on the concrete mistakes that white played. For example, once you remember knight a2 was played here, they could find a tactical strike based on b3 idea. Queen b6 and b3. Yes, this is how they can win. So that's why I myself do not play Benoni and don't recommend my students playing it. Now our third example, the game between Miguel Najdorf, so who is originally from Argentina, and Bobby Fischer. This time Bobby was defeated. Okay, so if you have any comments. By the way, one of our coaches of Chessland's online chess school is about to create a masterclass on a certain opening. I thought that it's probably should be Grunfeld, but looks like Grunfeld is a very complicated topic. What do you think? Which opening he'd better do a masterclass? So masterclass is a 4 hours event, 2 hours on Saturday, 2 hours on Sunday. Well, which opening would you like to learn? Because I'm sure that after 4 hours of learning it, you can at least try to play it in your games. Okay, so Peter asked, what about the status of our group classes? So, yeah, not ready yet, because I don't know what time I should schedule them. Because I still am struggling because I don't know who will join. But let me work on it. Okay, Brian thinks it's Catalan. Catalan for white, probably, you mean. Because, well, let's say, guys, this is a free event. How many people are watching it? Maximum is 30. If I, let's say, if I announce that there will be a group class and people need to pay some small but still some money for this event, let's say it's $10 for one lesson. So how many participants will be? If 1 or 2, it doesn't make sense to conduct such an event because it requires a lot of preparation. So if 5, I will say yes, it's possible. So that's why I'm not sure if 5 people are likely to join the group class. But just let me finish one thing, and then I will definitely announce group classes, and at least we can do it in a test mode for a few months, and then we'll see whether it can be conducted on a regular basis or it's just an experiment and we should think about something else. Okay, so yeah, if you have any ideas of which openings you need to learn, and well, just let me know. You can also message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. I'll type it here. Also at school@chesslands.com. So this is the link. Well, I think one email is enough. So any question, anything related to chess coaching, to group classes, to webinars, any questions regarding how should I progress, if you have any questions regarding courses or any feedback that you would like to share, you're welcome. Now the last example, the game between Neidorf and Fischer. So let's quickly go through it. This time Black started with King's Indian. They played d6, bishop e2, bishop g5. Well, it's possible. And the game continued with c5. Well, it's possible to take, to play knight f3, or to push the pawn forward. Here, white played d5. Otherwise, we won't be analyzing this game. e6, knight f3. h6 is a very good move. Bishop has to go there. This is important thing. To play h6 and to chase the bishop to h4. I will later explain why. E takes d5, c takes d5, and now we get the Benoni setup, which this time came with a different move order. So if you are a white player who likes d4, and this is what you play against King's Indian defense, make sure that you know how to play if black transposes to Benoni. So why h6 was important? Because now it's time to play g5. g5, the bishop goes there, and can you guess the next move of black in this position? I think the next move is actually good. At least it has a clear idea of how to play for a win. That's actually the reason why Bobby Fischer played it. Okay, so while you're thinking, let me answer if this move is good too. Well, it is good, but this makes the position a bit more simple, with more chances for black to draw the game. So it's symmetrical, and with this, you have a plan of knight c4, you have an idea of pushing e5. If you do like that, which active plans in order to play for a win you have? Of course, it's hard for them to play b5 then, but it seems to me that they no longer need it. They can play this, take here, and get the knight to e5, after which I think they are quite comfortable. No, I mean they get a comfortable position. So we have this position, how black should play. Knight h5. Okay, knight h5 is just a move that exchanges these bishops. So, well, it is a possibility, but it's not the best option. What else do we have? a6. Well, a6 is logical in order to play b5. What else? Okay, no suggestions. Knight a6, Rory. Okay, b5. So the engine marked this move as inaccuracy, but this is a very interesting idea. And if I were black, I would probably still play this move. Well, what happens? So if the bishop takes, it's knight e4. Why this was important? Because if it happened earlier with the bishop on h4, after b5, it was possible to capture first on f6, and then e4 pawn won't be hanging. So here, if you take, they take on e4, which we don't want. If they do, if we play this move, they play knight e4 anyway, and after knight e4, it's this. And if we go back, they just simply take it. So we experience even more problems here. So they could play b5 without a6, and then a6 is not required. But it's not the end. White continues with knight d2 defending this pawn. So b4 seems to be a nice idea, but after knight b5, how to defend this pawn? Only with this move, but then it's knight c4 and it's still hanging. That's why it seems that a6 is required. The e4 pawn is defended enough, so b5 is hanging. So guys, if you played with white and someone played this move, you have this tricky idea, which now hangs the pawn on b5. a6. Well, it's about equal. Maybe white is just a little bit better because of more space. Castle, rook e8, queen c2. So queen c2 is required to defend because b4 is likely to be played at any moment. And this is where they played a mistake. They started with this move. I think b4 is still the best option. b4, knight goes to a4, and then just bishop d7. e5, knight d5. So bishop f3, bishop a4, queen takes, but knight goes to b6, and that seems to be okay. Queen c2, d5. So maybe white has some initiative here after f4, for example, but black has a strong center. So this is that was a good possibility for black to continue. But they played queen e7 to add more pressure on e4, and that was actually a mistake because they won't capture on e4. Never. Rook e1. Knight bd7, a4, b4, and knight goes to d1. So there is no way they can capture here because of bishop d3 and this pin. This bishop d3 is supported with f3 idr 2. Okay, so knight e5. Knight goes to e3. Knight g6 with the idea of knight f4. This knight goes to c4, so this is a weakness. They have to block it with this move. This bishop becomes useless when the knight is on e4, so white decides to take. G takes. And what would you play in this position? So what we can say? Well, white has more space, but at the same time, these pieces are stuck, and white should somehow initiate a kind of a spring which allows their pieces to get into the place of action, to, well, there should be some expansion which allows white to use all their pieces, because right now they are stuck. So which move would you suggest in order to create this explosion, probably? Well, if the knight goes to f5, they definitely somehow, if it goes to f5, they definitely capture it. And that ruins our pawn structure and makes d5 a weakness. So this is definitely a wrong plan. Well, f3 is logical, but is a bit passive. Okay, yes, guys, it's e5. Yes, exactly, it's e5, d takes e5, and after this nice moves, it seems that white did everything really well. So all of their pieces are in place. Maybe the rook on f1 could be located better, but I don't think that, let's say this rook, if it is on a1, is better than on f1. So this rook at least defends on e1. So what then? So the idea is doing this, and they definitely need to move the queen. They play queen f8, but even if they played something else, it's still knight e5. We gain the pawn back and activate our pieces. Bishop b7, knight d to c4. Now, if let's say bishop d5 and knight d5, we can play this move and take the enemy queen. So that's why the pawn is not hanging, and it can move to d6 anytime we want. So rook a d8. Now it is hanging because d7 is covered. How to play? Well, d6 is one option. Instead, Najdorf plays knight c6, which also looks good. Rook e1, and then what? Rook e8. So strategically, white is completely winning. This bishop is neutralized, and if they take here, the pawn becomes extremely dangerous. This knight is successfully blocking all these pawns and any queenside activity that black can initiate. Their queen is really bad, and the main weakness is f4. So once the f4 pawn is won, the game is over. So knight f continues with rook d1, rook c8, and h3. Well, the move is not required, but why not? It's a prophylaxis. Knight goes to e8. Then it's a tempo gaining move with the knight. So they could retreat, but then it's knight b6 and knight d7. Well, how they played rook b8. Just queen f5. The pawn is gone on f4, and we are completely winning. So, for example, bishop a8, queen takes f4, white is simply winning. d6, d7 is the plan. The bishop is attacking something, but is actually useless. The game continued with knight d6, which was a blunder. Well, I'm sure you understand why. Well, it's obvious, so I don't think we should focus on it. So this didn't happen in the game. After knight d6, after knight takes knight, black already resigned. So, but if, let's say, they play a logical move, queen e4, white is a pawn up, black has no chances, and d6, d7 is coming. The rook is hanging at the moment, so the rook has to move. Where to? Let's say to d8. How can we play in this position? Knight c6? I think knight c6 works. Now what? If they take, then c7, c8. So because of this pawn, white wins. Even if, let's say, black had a pawn on g6, it still would be a winning position. Here, just no chances for a grandmaster, even such a strong grandmaster like Bobby Fischer. So, well, what can I say? Benoni is definitely a playable opening at club players level. Well, if you want to play it against players over 2200, then you should know it better than your opponent, and you should prepare some concrete ideas that you know and your opponent is unlikely to know. Development, which is not a good choice for players under 1500. Why? Because when they don't understand how exactly to develop pieces, they usually start doing weird things and lose the game. So if you play this opening, then you should have some concrete ideas in mind that you can initiate. For example, like Bobby Fischer had b5 here, but it can be easily parried with knight d2 move. However, it's not the end, so it's still possible to play this position, but continue here with b4. But this line should be well analyzed. So if you want to play Benoni with black, prepare some ideas that not happen. Just go through this webinar once again, and at least you'll get a clear understanding of what plans you may choose if you face this position. So you don't actually need to learn concrete lines. You can just understand typical ideas and plans. Okay, guys, so we are done for today. Do you have any questions before we finish? So from Peter's perspective, Benoni and Bianca are related. Is that true? No, it's not. Well, Bianco happens here, well, when the pawn is on e7 and the pawn is on c4. So no, c takes b5, a6. And they have this idea. So they sacrifice the pawn, but then initiate a counterplay through the open files A and B. This is the most common plan in Bianca Gambit. But the Benoni is completely different. No, well, we can say they are similar. Can we get the PGNs of today's 3 games? Okay, Johnny, I'll provide you with the PGNs for these 3 games. If anybody else wants, you can message me. I'll send it to you. You can also find them on any database. They are not some secret games. Uh, yeah, so the screen was frozen, so but I'm about to finish the event, so thank you for joining. See you next Sunday. Any suggestions are welcome.